This happened about 10 years ago. I was in graduate school at the time, working on my master's degree for clinical social work. My practicum was at a confidential shelter which housed women and children seeking shelter from domestic violence. Since I was an intern, I worked a lot of late-night shifts. After closing up the shelter, I headed home. It was after midnight and the roads were fairly empty. I lived in a smaller town at the time, so this was not unusual. As I approached the stoplight, I noticed a man a few yards away, walking towards the crosswalk. I suddenly felt very anxious and had an unsettling feeling, so I immediately locked my car doors. This was before I had a car with automatic locks. I usually drove without locking my car doors, as I have never felt unsafe while doing so. I felt better after having locked my doors and pulled up to the red light. Staring ahead, I noticed the man never crossed the street. I glanced to my right, where I had seen him earlier, and came face to face with his face pressed up against my passenger side window. I screamed, honked my horn, and told him to go away, but he continued standing there, staring right at me. Then he tried the handle of the door without success. I continued screaming at him, honking my horn and waiting for the red light to change. The man straightened, stepped away from the passenger side door, and moved quickly to my driver's side door, trying the handle again, but without success. He stood with a wide stance next to my car as though he was lunging. At the moment, I thought to myself, screw it, and slammed the gas to run the red light. The man kinda stumbled when I did this, and I think I ran over his foot in my escape. When I arrived home, I woke up my husband to tell him and called the police. The police never found the man, as by the time they sent someone out, he was gone. The police officer did commend me for running the red light, as well as potentially running over the man's foot. So the creepy dude who tried to get in my car in the middle of the night, let's not meet. This happened about 15 years ago. I was 21 years old and living in my very first apartment. It was a small bachelor apartment in a sketchy area. I grew up in a town that was known to be rough and tough. I knew how to handle myself and learned at a young age to keep my head down and not go looking for trouble. My apartment building was behind a bar. A lot of the customers of the bar would stand outside to smoke. When they stood outside to smoke, they would be looking at my apartment. Most of the people who were out smoking kept to themselves. A few would nod and say hello if I passed by. Never any issues until one evening. One evening I came home from work, I passed the bar and saw this extremely tall man outside smoking. As I passed, he stared at me. I gave him a slight nod, but he didn't acknowledge me. He just continued to stare. It made me uncomfortable, but I didn't think much of it. About an hour later, I hear a knock on my door. It was odd because you have to buzz people into the building. The building only had 8 units and I didn't really know any of the neighbors. I froze because I really didn't want to talk to anyone. But the knocking continued. I finally shouted, "Who is it?" But there was no response. I shouted again, "Who's there?" And the voice said, "It's Tom." I didn't know anyone named Tom, so I shouted back, "I don't know anyone named Tom. You must have the wrong apartment." The voice said, "You may not know me, but I know you. Open up so we can talk." I went over to the peephole and it was the tall dude from the bar. I loudly said, "Fuck off. I'm calling the cops." I heard his footsteps walk away and heard the building door open and then close. He was gone, or so I thought. A few minutes later, I peeked out the window and he was standing in the parking lot. He seemed to be talking to himself. At this point, I'm freaking out. I called my landlord who lived in the building next to me. He told me to call the police and that in the meantime, him and his brother would come check things out. I call the police and tell them what's going on. They said a car is on the way. Meanwhile, my landlord and his brother make their way to the parking lot. I watch them out my window and see them approach the tall dude. The tall dude takes one look at them and bolts. My landlord and his brother try to chase him, but tall dude gets away. I give my version of events and also a description of the man. The officer stares at me and says, "We've had reports of a man matching that description. who has been sexually assaulting women. Thank God you didn't open the door." A few days later, I get a call from the officer. He told me part of their investigation was talking to the owner of the bar. The owner called the police when the tall dude reappeared after a few days, and the police responded and arrested him. So, tall creepy dude from the bar, it was a close call, and I sincerely hope I never see you again. This happened when the Night Stalker show was really big on Netflix, so it was fresh in our minds because we were watching it. Earlier in the day, I was in my room with my dogs and roommate when we thought we heard the door open. We didn't think much of it until my roommate left the room a few minutes later and started screaming, and I heard the dog that followed her going nuts. The front door was wide open and somebody saw her and fled. They had been in our house and presumably heard us in the room chatting while doing who knows what. The dog ran the person off. We were really startled, but we figured that it was over and started locking the door, and that was that. Later that night, as we were watching the last episode of the Night Stalker show, we heard the doorknob jiggle. It's like 2 a.m., so we paused and looked at the door. Kinda shook and confused. When it registered what was happening, my roommate started to yell for them to go away and that the police were coming. My dumb self isn't too fond of calling the police, so I hesitated. But then they started banging something against the door to try and break it down. I grabbed my roommate, the dogs, and my partner, and we all rushed into another room to put more doors between us while police were on their way. I also had to stop my partner from trying to go out with a sword because we didn't know what this person might have or be trying to do. Luckily, he couldn't break the door down before the police arrived and he fled. They caught him and he tried to fight the police, so he's in jail for a lot longer than he would have been. He admitted to police he heard women when he came into the wrong house earlier, but no man, so he came back to find a friend. They never found the weapon he used on our door, and he won't say what it was, but it messed the metal up pretty badly. Hello everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment guys, that would help a lot to grow my channel. And I'm really new here guys, I recently got into narrating horror stories and I'm really enjoying it. So thank you in advance for all your support guys. This is my first video. I would definitely be uploading more videos. So more videos coming soon this week. Stay tuned guys. Take care.